So, welcome to week two of Nietzsche Genealogy and Morality. And this week, I want to say, first of all, a little bit about how Nietzsche thought about history and some of the things that he'd inherited from previous German philosophers. And I want to say, in the next bit, I want to say something about Nietzsche as a master of suspicion. And then I'll talk a bit about the death of God and what that means for morality. So first of all, let's have a little think about history and the significance of history in German philosophy. Now already, in the century before Nietzsche lived, Kant had already set out the idea that human history has a kind of destiny, right? Actually, that idea is already there in religion, so the idea that the history of the world has a kind of narrative arc. So there's creation, there's various interactions between God and mankind, conversations between God and Abraham and Moses and so on. The life of Jesus, if you're a Christian, the incarnation, if you're a Muslim, the final revelation. And then, in the future, that's all in our past, but then in the future, there is the day of judgment. It's called eschatology, right? So the idea that human history has this kind of grand structure, that it's going somewhere, that it has an inevitable destination, is already there in religion, this eschatological idea. It's there in, for example, Karl Marx, who's a contemporary of Nietzsche's, who thought that the history of class struggle gives human history an inevitable destination, that communism is our inevitable future. Well, what about Kant? So Kant thought that what he called our unsociable sociability meant that it was inevitable that we were going to achieve a kind of international world peace and somehow invent the United Nations. So nature kind of intends this for us. So nature has deprived us of the kinds of advantages that other animals have. We don't have natural grown armor or natural grown weapons. We just have, hands. But we can make tools and we can make societies. And that means that we will eventually band together. But what will we do then? We will make weapons and we'll attack the neighbours. But this forces us to make technological advances and to invent law. And at the moment, we've got law between the subjects of a kingdom. So now being 18th century Europe, right? There's law, so if your neighbours attack you, you can take them to court. But there isn't law between nations, and 18th century European nations were fighting each other all the time. Well, Kant thinks the same process that eventually gave rise to states and produced law between individuals within states must inevitably produce law between states, so that rather than fighting each other, states, countries, kingdoms could settle their differences, will be able to settle their differences by some kind of legal process. So Kant kind of invented the United Nations, but he saw the United Nations as the inevitable outcome of human history. Now, Hegel, generation after Kant, tells a similar kind of story. So Kant just kind of sketches this. Hegel took it upon himself to write the thing in detail. So Hegel wrote a history of humanity, and it's the most stupendously Eurocentric history of the world. It starts in ancient China, and the human spirit works its way west, getting more and more self-aware, deeper, and more technologically advanced until it eventually reaches where? Well, 19th century Germany. But Hegel had a different view from Kant about the inevitable future. So Hegel agreed with Kant that our antisocial sociability, the way that we band together, but with the purpose of competing, so you know, small kingdoms compete with each other, and some of them become big kingdoms, and then they compete with each other, and some of them become empires. This is the process of history, but it doesn't terminate for Hegel in the United Nations, because Hegel thought that ultimately we need war, that the health of the state, the good health of the state requires there to be at least the possibility of war with other states, because otherwise people forget that they need the state. So that's the background. And in the Greek state, Nietzsche says a similar sort of thing, only much more sketchily and with rhetoric at a much higher pitch. So Nietzsche tells a story in which nature wants humanity to achieve its destiny. So nature kind of uses war, conflict, and human need, human hunger. I mean, literal human hunger for food, but also human hunger for glory and riches. Nature uses all that in order to drive people to achieve greatness, right? So the aim of the whole thing is not for any one individual to be happy, but rather that there should be a very small number of individuals produced who are capable of some kind of greatness. And it might be artistic greatness, literary greatness, musical greatness, or it could be military greatness. Nietzsche speaks quite highly and favourably of Napoleon in this connection. I suspect that any kind of greatness will do, but it's the literary, artistic and military greatness that springs most readily to Nietzsche's mind. So there you have the idea that the whole history of humanity is justified and somehow redeemed, not by the emergence of the United Nations, as Kant thought, nor by the emergence of states in which liberal freedom flourishes, in which highly educated individuals who understand their place in the cosmos. That was kind of Hegel's idea. Rather, it's some kind of creative greatness that justifies the whole bloody business of human history. And what's more, he seems to suggest that this is inevitable, that somehow nature, with a capital N, is somehow this is an end that nature wants for us, and that nature has designed us in such a way that this is going to inevitably come about now. I think we can see that kind of eschatology, that kind of thought that the ends of nature, the purposes that nature has for us are somehow inevitable, and that they must come about. It's there in Kant, it's there in Hegel, it's there in Marx, and there's a flicker of it in Nietzsche. But quite importantly, Nietzsche is more naturalistic in the sense that he doesn't really think that there are gods in charge. God is dead. And and you can see that in the fact that he doesn't think it's inevitable that we will go on organising society in such a way that produces greatness. That's his great fear. That is why he is ranting on about socialists and liberals and anarchists and the like, people who want to modify society in a way that takes away the impetus that creates greatness. Look, says Nietzsche, greatness, artistic and military, is brought about by strife, by conflict. So you need artists to be in pain in order to produce great work. That idea is kind of familiar. the artist in a high attic, starving, impoverished, tormented. The tormented artist produces works of greatness that the comfortable person with extremely stable mental health doesn't feel driven to do. Well, says Nietzsche, there's something right about that, but also you have to see that at the societal level, that it's war, it's conflict, it's unhappiness, strife at the societal level as well that's important. So if you have people going around organising peace conferences and making sure that everybody's comfortable, what do you get? You get a society that will be incapable of creating anything great. You'll get a society that's incapable of going to war and creating great empires, but you'll also get a society where nobody's producing any great art and nobody really wants any great art, where people are quite happy to consume mediocre entertainment that just sort of passes the time. This is the last man. He talks about the last man in one of his lectures, well, one of his books, which we'll come to. So you can see all those themes present in the Greek state, and I would urge you to have another look at it with those clues in mind, that's Nietzsche saying, look, Kant and Hegel before me and others have painted this picture of the long history of humanity where strife, conflict, war have produced the conditions in which humanity can achieve its highest ends. I think humanity's highest ends are the production of artistic and military genius. But the difference between me and my predecessors is my predecessors thought, Kant, Hegel, he doesn't mention Marx, but we can include Marx, they all thought that the achievement of humanity's highest ends is inevitable. But I, Nietzsche, don't think so. I, Nietzsche, think that we are in the process of dismantling the conditions that make it likely that humanity will achieve its highest ends and replacing them with conditions in which we don't achieve anything great, that we become satisfied with comfortable suburban mediocrity. That's his big worry, and that's already there in the Greek state, and we'll see that keep reappearing.